G'day there everyone, and welcome to another episode of Hooked on Sport. This is the only place you need to go for your regular insight into what's making news and what should be making news on the playing fields around Adelaide and beyond. It's October 1. The AFL Grand Final is behind us and the summer sports are set to take hold. It gives us plenty to discuss, preview and prepare for. And to lead us on this journey through the most remarkable SA sporting yarns of the week, from the elite to the grassroots, is this state's undoubted local sport expert, Ben Hook. G'day, Hooky.
Wallace, g'day. Now, you've already just announced that it's October 1. No people know much about you, and that's okay, but you're looking a little bit miserable. You're 3 days on from your beloved Swans, absolutely blowing it in the grand final. How are you feeling 72 hours down?
Like a lot of other supporters of AFL teams, we are looking to 2025.
Yeah, my goodness, they were disappointing, weren't they? It's obviously not the purpose of our show. We're very much focused on South Australian sport, but gee, I felt sick for every Swans fan because they were particularly underwhelming. I've got no surprise that you're a bit disappointed, but hey, let's talk about all of the positive things, and in particular the positive things that are going on in South Australian sport, mate.
So what's caught your attention this week, Hooky?
Well, I'll tell you where we might start, Wallace. I want to tell you the story of who I reckon right now is the best dual athlete across the state in South Australia, and she doesn't play AFLW, which has routinely been the home of top-class dual athletes. So Emma de Broughe is her name. She's the opening batter for the South Australian women's cricket team. She can bowl a little bit of medium pace as well. She plays with the Melbourne Renegades in the WBBL. How about this? Last Friday night at the Hockey SA Awards, she won the Sandy Pisani Medal. So Wallace, just to explain, that's essentially the equivalent, hockey's equivalent of the McGarry Medal. So that's how good she is. And she didn't just win it, she absolutely won it in a canter. She only played 13 of the 14 games. She polled in 10 of those 13 games that she played. She picked up 27 votes across the 13, had 25 votes in 10 rounds, and wait for it, she had enough votes at the halfway point of the count to actually tie to win the medal. She won it by 9 in the end, so it was one of the most dominant counts you've ever seen. It was pretty much decided, confirmed with 4 rounds to go. So isn't it amazing that we have this young athlete, 24 years of age she is, who could be an absolute superstar of hockey, except she's busy playing professional cricket. What a super talent she is. She's an amazing story. Wallace, I'll tell you a little bit about her. I reckon 2020 and the COVID period, which we all had changes to our lives, but I reckon maybe for Emma, it was more profound than anyone else. So I reckon she was destined, had her heart set on going to the Paris 2024 Olympics. But if you remember at the end of 2020 and the end of 2021, the National League hockey season, known as Hockey 1, had to be cancelled both years. They just don't have the resources to be able to pull off those sorts of quarantine hubs and those things that we saw run very successfully by the bigger sports, the AFL, the NRL, and of course the cricket as well. So she didn't get an opportunity to play National League hockey for 2 years and played National League cricket in the WNCL, which is the 50-over competition, and the WBBL, which is the 20-over competition. She got to play during both of those periods. And so she became a professional cricketer really on the back of the fact that there was just no professional hockey or no elite level hockey for her to play. And what a decision that has been for her. And she's moved on to great heights, Wallace, being not only one of our state's best cricketers, but in her spare time, one of the state's best hockey players.
Absolutely amazing. So Hooky, she's an opening batter, off-spin bowler?
Yeah. So I think she's dabbled with a little bit of medium pace as well. I saw she took a wicket for South Australia when they played ACT on the Sunday just gone. They've won both of those games. She's a very slight girl. I don't like to talk about women's physical stature at all, but she's probably been someone who's seen as technically very correct, but not particularly powerful. But she's starting to develop some real skills of clearing the infield now. So I think she's going to be an interesting watch with how her game develops. She'd be the prototype test cricketer, I think, or long-form cricketer from a women's perspective, but they really don't play that form of the game. So Emma's certainly being encouraged to get more aggressive at the crease, and that's going to be fascinating to watch how she blossoms in that regard, because only 24, she's got so much upside ahead of her, and I'm really looking forward to seeing whether that develops as a T20 player or as a more long-form 50-over player, potentially heading towards some international test cricket.
So the women's soccer team, they play at Karen Rolton Oval?
Yeah, generally they'll actually play, they'll defend their title. They'll begin defending their WBBL title, the South Australians, at Adelaide Oval. From memory, I think that is on October 27. Now, Emma's not part of that team. She's signed with the Melbourne Renegades, who have been one of the strugglers of the WBBL competition, certainly compared to Adelaide, who've won the last two titles. But so they will see more and more game time at Adelaide Oval as they continue to develop a profile. In the meantime, though, Wallace, I have to be honest with you, they're playing at Karen Rolton Oval this Friday, so that's the 4th of October, and then they'll be there again on the 6th. They take on the last three titles have been won by the Tasmanian Tigers. Really good outfit. If you've got a free Sunday afternoon, take your kids down to Karen Rolton Oval, free to get in, and you're going to be watching some elite cricketers, but the women's game is really developing from a guile and trying to score by using the pace of the ball to really developing the skill of hitting the ball out of the park. They're good fun to watch at the moment. I spend a lot of time in particular watching the Adelaide Strikers in the WBBL, and I would encourage everyone to get out there and have a look at South Australia, Tasmania this weekend.
Great recommendation. Now, Hooky, while we're on hockey, you mentioned at the Hockey SA Awards, who won the men's best and fairest?
Yeah, good question, Wallace. It was Hassan Singh. So what's interesting in hockey, they have a Sandy Pisani medal in honour of the late, great Sandy Pisani, who was a wonderful Olympic hockey player, won an Olympic gold medal for Australia. The men's award isn't named as yet, so that's probably something that the Hockey SA officials will consider at some period of time. But Hassan Singh, also a Seacliff player, same as Emma, won it. He's an amazing story in his own right, just a 20-year-old, incredibly fast over the pitch. Born and grew up in Punjab region of India, which is a very, very strong hockey region. He moved, I think, as a 9-year-old to South Australia, grew up in Victor Harbour, learnt the game on grass, and it was only when he was starting to show some promise in that regional part of, the end of Fleurieu Peninsula there where Victor Harbour is, that he was invited down to try out at Seacliff, have a crack on a proper artificial surface, and he's just gone from strength to strength. So he actually played in a premiership with Seacliff. He was named the best player in the grand final, and now he's won the Hockey SA best and fairest in the Premier League as well. So what a trifecta for Hassan Singh. He's an interesting kid. He's a really good student as well, quite the academic. So whether hockey supersedes academia or vice versa, that'll be something to keep an eye out for. But he's got a huge future if he wants to get serious about his hockey. Hassan Singh, keep an eye out for that name.
Terrific. So what else caught your eye this week, Hooky?
I do want to talk about a couple of amazing young golfers. So we have had a real dearth of star professional golfers over the last generation, I think, Wallace. You'd say that Wade Ormsby is still the number one professional golfer here in South Australia, and we really haven't had a woman that's broken through. Stephanie Na has been in and around the secondary tour in the US, and we now see Crystal Blum, who's in and around the secondary tour in Europe. But I want people to keep an eye out for these two names. It's Raegan Denton, who's a 16-year-old at Henley High School, and Caitlin Peirce, who's a 20-year-old. Both of them lost in the semi-final level of the South Australian Amateur. It was Belinda Jai from the Concord Golf Club in New South Wales who went on to win it. But I'm telling you now, Raegan Denton and Caitlin Peirce both have physically and emotionally what it takes to get to the absolute upper levels of professional golf. And it is a huge, huge step from the local amateur ranks to make it all the way through. But I think they're both really exciting prospects. We've got 3 or 4 who I think have got a bit of a hope of making it professionally out of the women's ranks here in South Australian golf at the moment, Wallace. I'd certainly be keeping an eye out for Jamie Hards and Imogen Jessen as well. But I think the two right now, Raegan Denton and Caitlin Peirce, they are both absolute stars. Caitlin, a little bit older, and she's been quite to the pointy end of a US amateur and a British amateur as well. So just keep an eye out for those two. I'll just say those names one more time. Raegan Denton and Caitlin Peirce, the hot new up-and-coming prospects of South Australian and hopefully Australian golf.
Hooky, you've highlighted a couple of elite players in golf, the up-and-comers. I believe you've identified one in footy as well.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Wallace. So Emma Rasheed has just won the best and fairest for the Sturt Football Club. That was late last week, that presentation. Of course, Will Snelling winning the men's. Emma Rasheed is going to be someone to keep an eye out for. My goodness, still a teenager. She's the daughter of Roger Rasheed, the famous tennis player and coach. Roger, probably less known, actually played a little bit of footy for Sturt himself. So multi-talented athlete, Roger, but certainly with his roots in tennis, very good player and an incredible coach and an analyst of the game. But my goodness, his daughter, India, one of the most exciting prospects in Australian football, not just South Australian version of it. She's tall, she's agile, she's a high possession getter, she's a very, very good overhead mark, but her absolute one wood, if I want to use another golfing term, Wallace, is her left foot kick. It is powerful, it is long, and it is deadly straight as well. She played for Sturt in the SNFLW over the course of the last season. Now, that finished, around about the middle of the year, but she actually went through and had 20 disposals plus in every game bar one. And for someone who's probably around about the 6 foot mark and can play forward as much as she plays in the midfield, it's quite incredible to be racking up those sorts of possessions. She had 2 games against Central District where she cleared 34 possessions both times. So I think she's going to be one to keep an eye out for. She'll go into next year's draft where she's eligible for the first time. She's got some real tennis stuff about her, loves her tennis, hits up with dad. That's often the way she gets fit. There's a machine called a VersaClimber. And no one really in modern sport uses it anymore except for tennis players, because it's a very good way of getting your legs moving without actually, pounding the pavement, if you like. Well, Roger has India on the VersaClimber for hour on end. So, but poor old India having to deal with that VersaClimber. So, Emma de Broughe, she's currently playing for Sturt. She's almost certainly going to be on an AFLW list next year. Her family's Port Mad, mate. So I have to be honest with you, too. I hope the Crows pick her up. Wouldn't that just be beautiful?
The Swans, Hooky.
Wonderful family, the Rasheeds. Of course, Ataf is her auntie, who's been very heavily involved in the Port Adelaide Football Club and more recently major events in South Australia. But keep an eye out for the name, Emma de Broughe, Wallace.
Fantastic. Now, Hooky, you also you're talking about a father and a daughter and their sporting pursuits. Talk to me about the 100 Club.
Yeah, I love this story. I was actually up a couple of weeks ago at the Great Southern League. I was emceeing their medal count, and it was won by a lad called Jesse McKinnon, the son of Robbie McKinnon. But there was another father-son combination up from that night that I thought was just worth reiterating the story. So there's a bloke called Ian Basham who kicked 100 goals in the Great Southern Football League 4 times across his career. He did it twice for Encounter Bay and twice for Victor Harbour. He's a life member of the competition up there, played in 5 premierships. A bit of a legend is Ian Basham. Anyway, his son Sam, who spent most of his life as a key defender, has snuck up and started playing forward in recent years. And this year, he got to the final minor round game of the season and he was on 85 goals for the year. Well, would you believe he kicked 16? And finished on 101 and kicked the ton for the first time in his career and followed in the footsteps of his father, if you like. It won him the leading goal kicker award for the year, and Dad Ian was the guy who presented it to him on the night at the awards. He was the only person to kick 100 goals across South Australian country footy in the minor round this year. One lad from my Ponga Sellicks did it in the grand final of that same league, but right across South Australian country footy, no one else other than Sam Basham kicked 100. He follows in his father's footsteps. What a cool story.
Oh, it's awesome. Hooky, there's a local sporting club that broke a 62-year premiership drought.
Yeah, Wallace, this is just such a heartwarming story. It's the Woodville Wasps Rugby Club. Began life in 1933. We're absolutely the kingpin club in the 1950s and even the early 60s. They won 3 premierships a row in the 1950s, but they really hit hard times from about the 1970s onwards. They've spent a bit of time out of the top flight league, but they've re-engaged, re-announced themselves in recent years, and they've done that not just in the men's competition, but they've also done it in the women's competition. Their last premiership at A-grade level, either men or women, was in 1962, and the women have just been making this steady build. The men haven't quite broken through yet. Brighton, Burnside, Old Collegians, usually the top 3 in the men's competition, and they haven't quite pierced that membrane, but they absolutely have in the women's. They made the grand final last year and were shaded Southern Suburbs, I think it was, Wallace, but this year played an absolutely sublime final series, won their second semi-final, went on to win the grand final. So Woodville Wasps, 62 years after they last celebrated and tasted premiership glory, they've done it this time around. And what a beautiful modern rugby story it is that it was the women who've taken them back to the top of the tree. So congratulations to the Woodville Wasps Rugby Club. I just love stories like that.
That's great local stuff, Hooky. We've got the series Australia versus India cricket series. A lot of South Australians in the mix there. Obviously, Alex Carey and Travis Head. Really interested in your thoughts on the series, but specifically the opening batsman, as Travis Head, it's been suggested that he may be a starter there.
No, you've identified it really well, Wallace. That certainly is the talk of the town at the moment, that Travis Head could be opening the batting for Australia when Australia takes on India in this incredible Border Gavaskar Test series that's coming up. In my opinion, it has to be either Mitchell Marsh or Cameron Bancroft. It can't be Travis Head. You cannot try and solve a problem by creating a new one. And yes, they have a problem at the top of the order with the exodus of David Warner, and no one's really identified themselves as the ideal candidate to fill that role. But Travis has become such a match winner as a middle order swashbuckler. I think you're just going to be taking so much away from what is one of the real power spots of the Australian team by moving Travis from the middle order to the top of the order. As the conditions settle, Travis can absolutely rattle opponents, but allowing an opponent the first shot at him in those tougher conditions with the better ball, I think is just a waste of his skill and a waste of what's a really great asset. So one day opening batting, yes, he's doing that job at the moment, and I think it's fair to say that that does bear some similarities, but not many. And I reckon the capacity that Travis will have to face an inordinate amount of short pitch bowling with a new ball on a fresh pitch that he doesn't really have to deal with as a one-day opener or a T20 opener just segregates it enough for me. South Australia's going to, I think, allow him to open the batting in the Sheffield Shield. They have their own concern there. Henry Hunt's going to fill one spot and they're not really sure who's going to fulfill the other. So taking on the role of just giving Travis that opportunity to see if he can fulfill the role is not unreasonable, I think, in the circumstances. But I'll put it to you like this, Wallace. Imagine if you've got a full forward in an AFL game and he's kicked 4 goals to half-time, but you've also identified that your centre-half back's struggling a bit with the opposition centre-half forward. The one bloke you wouldn't put there is your own full forward. He's going to kick enough goals to win you the game. And I just reckon it's the same with Travis Head. You've got to leave him at number 5 and let him score you enough runs to win the game that can actually overcome the problem that you potentially have at the top of the order. So certainly from my perspective, if we see one thing, it's Travis Head remaining where he is and where he's become one of the most dominant players in world cricket, batting at number 5.
I'm interested in when you were talking about the different pitches. Obviously, pitches are set up differently, 2020 one day versus the longer form 5-day test matches or state games. Are the pitches different when they're set up for a state game as opposed to a test match?
Yes and no. In Adelaide, in particular at Adelaide Oval, you will find that Damien Huff, the groundsman, will try and prepare basically an identical wicket. Now, they're all drop-ins and they all have slightly different characteristics, and you obviously deal with the fact that you could have had some very, very different weather conditions in early October that you might experience, say, at the end of February. But certainly from a South Australian perspective, you're going to find the wickets are pretty much identical. However, there are situations where across the Sheffield Shield, it's absolutely imperative that you get a result, and you get a result inside 4 days to be able to maximise the points. Whereas test matches, certainly from a commercial perspective, venues like to see them go 5 days. So, yeah, there are some differences in wickets, but there are also some differences as well between a one-day wicket or a T20 wicket and a test match wicket. A test match wicket starting on day 1 needs to be able to last 5 days. A one-day wicket, by the following day, it can be a bit old and tired, and that's not really going to be a problem. So, yeah, there are some vast differences between what Travis experiences as an opening batter with white ball cricket and what he would experience as an opening batter in red ball cricket. And I think those differences are quite profound.
Hooky, as we're closing out the footy season, I know that West Coast have just recently appointed a new coach. What are you seeing in South Australia, in particular Port?
Yeah, Andrew McQualter, the new coach of the West Coast Eagles. I thought that was interesting that he's been heavily involved in the Richmond Football Club, and the West Coast Eagles are about to make a raid on the Tigers. So probably just opportunistic, if you like, that they've gone for a Richmond identity as coach who's going to be pretty happy to bring those guys with him. Yeah, Port Adelaide's going to be an interesting chat over the course of the next couple of weeks, I think. He's been there for a long time, never made a grand final. These are all facts that everyone is well aware of, and I still think Port Adelaide has to answer a question in its own mind as to whether Ken is the right guy to be coaching the football club next year. And I think there's a simple solution to work that out, but Ken himself is the secondary answer to the question. The first question is, do they genuinely believe they are in the premiership window in 2025? And if the answer is yes, now they're going to be bringing in Lukosius from the Gold Coast Football Club. So that will certainly add to their depth and capacity. But if the answer is yes, we can win a flag in 2025, then they have to be chips in with Ken Hinkley and allow him to see that run through. You could argue that despite finishing second, their performance in the final series was such that they are a long way off the pace from the absolute top end of town. So I'm identifying Sydney, Geelong, GWS, and of course Brisbane in that top four. Port Adelaide, was it a fake top four, finishing second? And there's certainly their finals performances, you could make that argument that they're probably not quite up to it. If they're not quite up to it, they may need a year or two to reset. They've got a wonderful midfield, but they need some overhaul in their forward line. Charlie Dixon's gone, and Travis Boak may well be the next to move on as well. That'll be an interesting discussion for them. But they certainly need some regeneration in the forward line, and their back line does get exposed a little bit too often. I don't think they've worked out what their best six looks like yet. Plus, they're going to lose almost certainly Dan Houston. So that does have an adverse effect on their back line. So if Port Adelaide, and this would probably be my assessment of it, but if Port Adelaide does decide that they need to maybe just find a few more players, bring in a bit more top end, and that might take 18 months to do, then I don't think they're going to win the flag in 2025. And with Ken Hinkley in the final year of his contract, he will become a dead man walking. And I think that's unreasonable to put him through that. We saw that with the GWS Giants and their coach 3 years ago, I think it was. And I would argue that if they've decided that they need to take a bit of a step back next year, reasonable decision to make, but Ken can't be the coach. So I think that's still a legitimate talking point for the Port Adelaide Football Club as to whether Ken Hinkley coaches them next year.
Hooky, great chat. Thanks so much. See you next week.
Brilliant, Wallace. Loves it. Looking forward to next week already. Hey, Wallace, just before we wrap it up, got a quick one for you. There's a young lad called Fred Hassel who has done something pretty amazing in the pool this week. He swam 22.99, I beg your pardon, for the 50 metres. It's the state record for 15-year-old boys. The reason why I thought it was interesting, the previous record holder, a bloke called Kyle Chalmers. So my word, is he in esteemed company, young Fred Hassel? He might be one to keep an eye out for.
Another episode of Hooked on Sport in the bag. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen. And if you enjoy the podcast, let your mates know. Just search Hooked on Sport to find us. And if you've got a local sporting story to share with Ben, send us a message via our socials or by email, hookedonsportpodcast@gmail.com. This is also where you can contact Hooky if you're looking for SA's best sporting MC for your next sporting event. Hooked on Sport is produced by Wallace Long at C2M and music by Ben Watson at Zest Entertainment.